Millionaire's wife is unmasked, but what she reveals leaves everyone scared. Subscribe for more exciting stories. In bustling New York City, between the streets of the traditional Upper East Side and the quaint alleys of Greenwich Village, two distinct realities were about to intertwine irreversibly. Emily Parker, 26, a dedicated teacher at a public school, was crossing the square in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art on that autumn afternoon, carrying books and dreams in her calloused hands of someone who had always worked to earn her place. The New York wind played with her brown hair when she bumped into Alexander Rothschild, 32, who had just left a meeting at his family's law firm. The books scattered on the ground, and amidst hurried apologies and shy smiles, something bigger than chance began to unfold. Alexander, impressed by Emily's simplicity and intelligence, couldn't contain his immediate interest. As he helped her collect the books, he noticed the titles of American literature and struck up a conversation about F. Scott Fitzgerald, surprising himself with the deep knowledge she demonstrated about the author. "Literature is my passion," Emily confessed, not imagining that those words would be the beginning of a story that would change her life. Alexander, enchanted, proposed coffee right there at the iconic Met Cafe. Emily hesitated, aware of the contrast between her simple dress and his impeccable suit, but something in Alexander's sincere gaze made her accept. In the weeks that followed, their meetings multiplied. Alexander discovered in Emily a woman unlike any he had met in his social circle. She wasn't impressed by luxury cars or expensive restaurants. Her brilliance came from her passion for education and the way her eyes lit up when talking about her students. Mrs. Elizabeth Rothschild, the family matriarch, began to notice changes in her son's behavior. Alexander no longer attended all social events, and Sunday lunches at the Rothschild mansion became rarer. When she finally discovered about Emily through comments from New York society, her distaste was immediate. "Alexander, darling, you need to maintain our family's standard," she warned during a dinner, not knowing that her son was already completely in love. "There are so many young ladies from good families interested in you." But Alexander had found in Emily something that money couldn't buy: authenticity. In the afternoons they spent together, whether in Central Park or at the book fairs she loved so much, he rediscovered the pleasure of simple things. Her smile had the power to make the weight of the Rothschild name seem lighter. The first time Emily visited the Rothschild mansion on Fifth Avenue, she felt the weight of gazes piercing her soul. The paintings on the walls seemed to judge her presence, and the servants whispered in the corridors. Mrs. Elizabeth, with her pearl necklace and impeccable posture, merely greeted her coldly, making a point of mentioning the cultural differences during dinner. But it was on that very night that Alexander decided he wouldn't allow social prejudices to dictate his future. In the mansion's garden, under a starry sky that seemed to bless that moment, he proposed to Emily. "I don't care where you came from, I care who you are," he said, placing the family ring on her finger. The news of the engagement fell like a bomb in New York's social circles. Mrs. Elizabeth, at her tea table with her country club friends, had to swallow the malicious comments about how her only son had chosen just any teacher for a wife. But Alexander remained firm, facing the pressures with the same determination that Emily demonstrated in her classroom. The wedding was set for 3 months from then, time enough for the venomous tongues of society to busy themselves spreading rumors and speculations about the future of the union. Emily continued her work at the school, refusing to abandon her students or change who she was, even when Alexander offered for her to dedicate herself only to the wedding preparations. Amidst the preparations, Mrs. Elizabeth maintained an artificial smile on her lips, while meticulously planning how to show her future daughter-in-law that the world of the Rothschilds was not for just anyone. What she didn't know was that Emily harbored within herself a strength that not even she fully understood, a strength that would be fundamental in the challenges to come. The wedding took place on a golden spring afternoon in the Rothschild mansion's garden. Emily, in her simple yet elegant wedding dress, radiated a beauty that went beyond the physical. It was pure happiness emanating from her eyes. Alexander, seeing her walk down the red carpet between the rose bushes cultivated for generations by his family, was certain of his choice. Mrs. Elizabeth observed everything with a rehearsed smile, greeting guests as the perfect hostess she had always been. But her eyes couldn't completely hide her discontent when she saw Emily's simple relatives mixed with her high society friends. Among them was William Harrison, her longtime friend and confidant, who observed the scene with particular interest. During the reception, the different worlds mixed awkwardly. On one side, Emily's teacher colleagues with their sincere laughter and conversations about education. On the other, businessmen, politicians, and socialites, whispering among imported champagne glasses. In the middle of this invisible division, Emily navigated with a natural grace that surprised many. "She has a special gift," William commented to Elizabeth, as they watched the bride chat animatedly with a mixed group of guests. "She manages to make everyone feel at ease." "Gift? You mean lack of refinement," Elizabeth replied, adjusting her pearls. "But don't worry, dear. I have plans to transform her into a true Rothschild." The weeks following the wedding brought significant changes. Emily and Alexander moved into a house in the same gated community where the Rothschilds lived, an insistent suggestion from Mrs. Elizabeth. The matriarch made frequent visits, always with new advice on how Emily should behave, dress, or decorate the house. "Darling, a Rothschild lady cannot continue teaching at a public school," Elizabeth said during one of her unannounced visits. "How about taking a position at the family foundation? It would be more appropriate." Emily maintained her composure, but each suggestion was like a small needle in her identity. Alexander noticed his wife's discomfort, but tried to mediate the situation, torn between his love for his mother and loyalty to the woman he had chosen. It was during one of these days that William Harrison, the family friend, began to make regular visits to the young couple. Unlike Elizabeth, he showed genuine interest in Emily's stories about her students and her pedagogical projects. His presence brought a welcome relief to the tense atmosphere that always settled when Mrs. Elizabeth was around. "You know, Emily," William said during an afternoon tea, "not all Rothschilds were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. The family itself built its fortune with a lot of work 3 generations ago. Elizabeth sometimes forgets that." These conversations strengthened Emily, who began to better understand the dynamics of the family she had entered. However, Mrs. Elizabeth observed the closeness between her friend and her daughter-in-law with growing suspicion. In her mind, she was already planning something bigger, an official reception to introduce Emily to New York society. "It will be an opportunity to show that you can fit into our circle," Elizabeth announced during a Sunday lunch, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll invite all the important people in New York." Emily felt the weight of those words. She knew it wouldn't be just a party, it would be a test, a chance for Elizabeth to expose her supposed inadequacies. Even so, she accepted the challenge with dignity. "It will be a pleasure, Mrs. Elizabeth," she replied, holding her mother-in-law's gaze. At night, alone with Alexander, Emily let the tears run silently. Not out of fear of the event itself, but because of the constant need to prove her worth. Alexander hugged her tightly, promising to be by her side, but they both knew this would be a battle that Emily would need to face mainly alone. What neither of them imagined was that reception would be just the beginning of a series of events that would forever change the dynamics of the Rothschild family. And that fate held a surprise that not even Mrs. Elizabeth, with all her power and influence, could control. The Rothschild mansion shone like a beacon of opulence on that Saturday night. Luxury cars paraded through the entrance, dropping off businessmen, politicians, and celebrities, all eager to witness Emily's official debut in New York high society. The main hall gleamed with exuberant floral arrangements and glittering crystals, a meticulously architected setting by Mrs. Elizabeth to serve as the stage for her plan. Emily took a deep breath before descending the grand staircase. She wore an elegant navy blue dress, carefully chosen to balance sophistication and simplicity. Alexander, by her side, squeezed her hand in support. "You look stunning," he whispered, giving her courage. At the foot of the stairs, Mrs. Elizabeth waited, impeccable in her gala dress and with her most rehearsed hostess smile. "Darling, welcome to your night," she said, air-kissing Emily's cheeks. "Come, there are so many important people to meet." What followed was a social marathon. Emily was introduced to dozens of faces, all smiling, all evaluating. Businessmen subtly questioned her education. Society ladies examined her dress with critical eyes, and politicians tested her knowledge of current affairs. "And how do you deal with the difficulties out of teaching in a public school?" asked one lady, her disdain barely disguised in her voice. Emily smiled, maintaining her composure. "Actually, Ma'am, I find daily inspiration in my students. Their thirst for knowledge and resilience are admirable." Mrs. Elizabeth, never too far away, interfered with seemingly innocent comments but loaded with intention. "Emily is still adapting to our way of life, isn't she, dear? Everything must seem so different to you." It was during one of these interactions that William Harrison approached, offering Emily a glass of champagne and a moment of relief. "You're doing very well," he murmured, guiding her to a quieter corner of the hall. "Remember, true strength isn't in changing who you are, but in remaining true to yourself in the face of adversity." William's words were like a balm, but the relief was brief. Soon, Emily found herself again at the center of attention, with Mrs. Elizabeth orchestrating each interaction like a merciless conductor. As the night progressed, Emily felt fatigue weighing on her shoulders. The superficial conversations, the judging looks, the veiled provocations, everything was beginning to take its toll. It was then that she felt a sudden wave of nausea, followed by a slight dizziness. "Are you all right, darling?" Alexander asked, noticing her paleness. Before she could answer, Emily stumbled slightly. The buzz in the hall diminished, and all eyes turned to her. Mrs. Elizabeth, perceiving the situation, quickly approached, torn between genuine concern and fear of a social scandal. "Perhaps it's best we take Emily to rest for a bit," William suggested, offering support. It was at this moment that Emily, recovering from the dizziness, had a sudden realization. The symptoms, the fatigue of recent days, it all made sense now. She looked at Alexander, a mixture of surprise and joy in her eyes. "Alexander," she whispered, I think I'm pregnant." The news, though whispered, seemed to echo through the hall. Nearby guests heard, and within minutes, the buzz spread throughout the party. Mrs. Elizabeth's expression was a mixture of shock and disbelief, while Alexander embraced Emily, a radiant smile illuminating his face. The dynamics of the party changed instantly. Guests who previously looked at Emily with disdain now approached to offer congratulations. Women offered advice on pregnancy, and even the most skeptical seemed to soften at the news. Mrs. Elizabeth, perceiving the change in the atmosphere, quickly composed herself. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have one more reason to celebrate tonight. Our family is about to grow." As guests applauded and toasted to the news, Emily leaned on Alexander, exhausted but relieved. The night that should have been her most difficult social test had transformed into something completely different. William, observing everything closely, smiled to himself. He had known Elizabeth long enough to know that this wasn't the end, but just the beginning of a new phase in the Rothschild family dynamics. When the last guests had left, and the hall finally fell silent, Emily and Alexander retired to their room, leaving Mrs. Elizabeth alone with her thoughts. The matriarch, seated in her favorite armchair, contemplated the turn of events. A new Rothschild was on the way, and with it, new challenges and possibilities. Elizabeth knew she would need to adapt her plans, but one thing was certain. Her determination to shape the family's future remained unshakable. The weeks that followed the party brought an apparent calm to the Rothschild mansion. The news of Emily's pregnancy seemed to have temporarily softened tensions, creating a silent truce between her and Mrs. Elizabeth. However, beneath the surface of this fragile peace, currents of change were beginning to form. Emily, now at the beginning of her second trimester, chose to continue teaching, much to her mother-in-law's poorly disguised dismay. On a sunny morning, as she prepared to go to school, she encountered Mrs. Elizabeth in the hallway. "Dear," Elizabeth began, her tone falsely sweet, "don't you think it's time to consider taking leave? After all, the Rothschild heir deserves all the care." Emily took a deep breath before responding. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Elizabeth, but my doctor has assured me I can continue working. Besides, my students count on me." Elizabeth's gaze hardened momentarily, but she maintained her plastic smile. Of course, but remember, you have new responsibilities now." Meanwhile, Alexander found himself increasingly torn between his love for Emily and his mother's expectations. At the family's law firm, he struggled to reconcile Rothschild traditions with his own ideals of social justice, inspired by Emily. It was during a tense lunch with important clients that Alexander made a decision that would shake the firm's foundations. He proposed creating a pro bono department dedicated to social causes. The idea was met with skepticism by his more conservative partners. "Rothschild," one of them said, "I understand your enthusiasm, but our firm has a reputation to uphold. We can't mix with certain elements." Alexander, thinking of Emily and their child's future, stood firm. "It's precisely our reputation that I want to strengthen, to show that the Rothschilds are not just about profit, but also about social responsibility." The news of Alexander's initiative reached Mrs. Elizabeth's ears through social circles before he could even tell her. She confronted him during a family dinner, her voice trembling with indignation. "What do you think you're doing? First you marry her," she said, pointing at Emily, "and now you want to turn our legacy into some kind of charity institution?" Emily, feeling the tension escalating, tried to intervene. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I believe Alexander's idea is noble and can bring much good." "You," Elizabeth interrupted, turning to Emily. "All of this started with you. Your ideas, your values, they're corrupting everything we've built." Alexander stood up, his voice firm. "Enough, Mother. Emily is not responsible for my decisions. It's time for the Rothschild family to evolve, and if you can't accept that..." Before he could finish, William Harrison, who was dining with them that night, intervened with his calm voice. "Elizabeth, my dear, perhaps it's time we consider that change isn't always a bad thing. Remember how your father resisted when you wanted to modernize the family businesses." William's comment seemed to hit Elizabeth like a bucket of cold water. She fell silent, her eyes alternating between anger and confusion. Without saying anything more, she got up and left the dining room. In the silence that followed, Emily felt a wave of nausea, unrelated to the pregnancy but to the tension of the moment. Alexander hugged her, murmuring words of comfort. William, observing the couple, spoke softly. "Don't worry. Elizabeth can be stubborn, but deep down she only wants the best for the family. Give her time." That night, lying beside Alexander, Emily couldn't sleep. "Mrs." Elizabeth's words echoed in her mind. Was she really changing the Rothschild family? And if she was it for the better? Meanwhile, in her room, Mrs. Elizabeth was rereading an old letter, yellowed by time. It was from her father, written years ago, praising her courage in modernizing the family business against his will. A solitary tear ran down her face as she began to question her own actions. The next morning, Emily found an anonymous envelope in her mailbox. Inside, a short note warned her, "Beware of the matriarch. She plans to separate you and control the baby's future. Stay alert." With trembling hands, Emily kept the note, deciding not to tell Alexander immediately. She knew that the next steps would be crucial, not only for her marriage, but for the future of the entire Rothschild dynasty. As the sun rose over New York City, illuminating the Rothschild mansion, it became clear that the winds of change that were blowing were just the harbinger of a greater storm that was to come. The New York autumn painted the streets with shades of orange and red, reflecting the changes occurring within the Rothschild family. Emily, now in her 7th month of pregnancy, faced her days with a mixture of anxiety and determination, the anonymous letter weighing on her thoughts. On a particularly busy afternoon at the school where she taught, Emily was surprised by an unexpected visit from William Harrison. The Rothschild family friend seemed out of place among the noisy children and walls colorfully decorated with schoolwork. "William, what are you doing here?" Emily asked, guiding him to an empty classroom. The gray-haired gentleman smiled gently. "I came to see how you're doing, my dear, and also to give you some advice." Emily felt a chill down her spine. Did he know about the letter? William continued, "Elizabeth is planning something. I don't know exactly what, but I know that look of hers. Be prepared." "Why are you telling me this?" Emily questioned, cautious. "Because I believe you're exactly what the Rothschild family needs," William replied, his eyes shining with a mixture of wisdom and mischief. "Change, my dear. Change is inevitable, and you are the catalyst." Meanwhile, at the Rothschild firm, Alexander was facing his own battle. The pro bono department he had created was causing waves. Some traditional clients were threatening to leave the firm, while new ones attracted by social responsibility were beginning to appear. During a tense meeting with the partners, Alexander defended his vision. "Gentlemen, The world is changing. Either we adapt or we get left behind. It was at this moment that Mrs. Elizabeth entered the meeting room, surprising everyone. "My son is right," she declared to everyone's shock. "The Rothschilds have always led changes. It will be no different now." Elizabeth's unexpected support changed the tone of the meeting, as the partners animatedly discussed the new directions of the company. Alexander observed his mother with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. What could have motivated this sudden change? Back at the mansion, Emily found Mrs. Elizabeth in the garden, tending to her prize-winning roses. The mother-in-law, seeing her, gestured for her to approach. "Emily, dear, come see these new seedlings," Elizabeth called, her tone surprisingly warm. Cautiously, Emily approached. Elizabeth began talking about the roses, but her words soon took another direction. "You know, Emily, cultivating roses is like raising a family. Sometimes we need to prune what no longer serves so that new flowers can grow," Elizabeth said, her eyes fixed on the plants. Perhaps I've been too rigid a gardener lately." Emily, touched by the metaphor and Elizabeth's unusual vulnerability, felt her guard lower a bit. "Mrs. Elizabeth, But before she could continue, they were interrupted by Alexander arriving home from work, excited about the day's events. "Mother, Emily, you won't believe it. Mother's support changed everything at the firm. We're about to close a partnership with an education NGO." Dinner that night was the most harmonious in months. Elizabeth seemed to have lowered her defenses, asking genuine questions about Emily's work and plans for the baby. Alexander, radiant, talked about the company's new projects. However, while helping to clear the dishes, Emily couldn't help but notice a strange gleam in Elizabeth's eyes. The anonymous letter came back to her mind, and she wondered if this apparent change in attitude wasn't part of a larger plan. Late at night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to share her fears with Alexander. She showed him the anonymous letter and expressed her doubts about Elizabeth's sudden change. Alexander listened attentively, his face a mask of concern. "I can't believe my own mother, but you're right, we need to be cautious." They decided to keep up appearances but stay alert to any suspicious moves from Elizabeth. What they didn't know was that at that very moment, William Harrison was having a private conversation with Mrs. Elizabeth in her study. "My dear friend," William was saying, "you're playing a dangerous game. Remember, sometimes to maintain control, you need to let go of it." Elizabeth looked at him, her eyes a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I'll do what's necessary to protect the Rothschild legacy, William, even if that means—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of her unspoken words hung in the air like a storm cloud. As night fell over New York City, the residents of the Rothschild mansion slept, each carrying their own secrets and plans. The family's future hung by a thread, and the next moves of each would determine not only the fate of the baby that was to come, but of an entire dynasty. Summer arrived in New York City with a relentless heat wave, reflecting the intensity of emotions simmering in the Rothschild mansion. Emily, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, felt the weight not only of her baby, but also of the expectations and tensions surrounding her. On a particularly stifling morning, Emily decided to organize the baby's room. While arranging clothes and toys, she found an old box hidden in the back of the closet. Curious, she opened it and discovered old photos and documents of the Rothschild family. Among the yellowed papers, an envelope caught her attention. When she opened it, Emily felt her heart race. It was Elizabeth Rothschild's birth certificate. But what shocked her was the mother's name. An unknown woman, not Alexander's grandmother she knew from family photos. "What are you doing?" Elizabeth's voice sounded behind her, making Emily startle. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I didn't mean to snoop, but—" Emily stammered, holding the certificate. Elizabeth's face paled at the sight of the document. For a moment, it seemed she would explode with anger, but then her shoulders slumped and she sat heavily in the nursery's rocking chair. "I suppose it's time for the truth," Elizabeth sighed. "Yes, the woman on the certificate is my real mother, a Rothschild family maid." Emily listened in shock as Elizabeth revealed her story. Born from an affair between the Rothschild patriarch and an employee, she was raised as a legitimate daughter to avoid scandals. Her struggle to prove her worth and keep up appearances had shaped her personality over the years. "Do you understand now, Emily? Everything I did was to protect this family, to ensure no one else went through what I went through, Elizabeth concluded, silent tears running down her face. At that moment, Emily saw Elizabeth not as the intimidating mother-in-law, but as a woman who had carried a heavy burden for decades. Impulsively, she hugged Elizabeth, surprising them both. Alexander, arriving home early, found the unusual scene. His wife and his mother embraced, crying together in the baby's room. Confused, he demanded explanations. As the truth came to light, the family dynamics began to change. Alexander, shocked by the revelation about his origins, spent days processing the information. Emily, in turn, began to see Elizabeth with new eyes, better understanding her actions. Meanwhile, at the company, the changes implemented by Alexander were beginning to bear fruit. The pro bono department gained media attention, attracting new clients and talent. The Rothschild reputation, previously associated only with power and wealth, now gained nuances of social responsibility. William Harrison, closely observing these transformations, decided it was time to reveal his own role in this story. One afternoon, he invited Emily, Alexander, and Elizabeth for tea in his elegant apartment overlooking Central Park. "My dears," he began, his tone serious, "there's something you need to know. It was I who sent that anonymous letter to Emily." The revelation fell like a bomb. Elizabeth, outraged, stood up suddenly. "How could you, William? I thought you were my friend." William raised his hand, asking for calm. "And I am, Elizabeth. I'm a friend to all of you. That's why I did what I did. I saw this family falling apart and knew something needed to change." He explained that his intention was to create a situation that would force everyone to face their fears and secrets. "Sometimes we need a catalyst for change," he concluded, looking meaningfully at Emily. The silence that followed was heavy. Alexander, protectively embracing Emily, was the first to speak. "And now? What happens to our family?" Elizabeth, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "What happens is that we rebuild, together." She looked at Emily, her eyes full of new understanding. "If you'll have me, I'd like to truly be a grandmother to this baby. No games, no manipulations." Emily moved, nodded. "I would like that very much, Mrs. Elizabeth." As the sun set over New York City, casting golden hues through the apartment windows, the Rothschild family found themselves at the beginning of a new chapter. The revealed secrets, though painful, had paved the way for a long-needed honesty. Alexander, with his hand on Emily's belly, felt a kick from the baby. "I think the little one approves of our new family dynamics," he joked, drawing smiles from everyone. Leaving William's apartment, the family walked united, not just physically, but emotionally. The challenges weren't over, but now they would face them together, with a new understanding and mutual respect. As they got into the car, Elizabeth held Emily's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me that family is more than blood or name. It's love and acceptance." The car departed, taking the Rothschilds back home, not just to a mansion, but to a true home, ready to welcome the new life that was about to arrive. The weeks following the revelation in William's apartment brought a palpable change to the dynamics of the Rothschild family. The mansion, once a silent battlefield, now breathed an atmosphere of reconciliation and hope. Emily, now entering her 8th month of pregnancy, found an unexpected ally in Elizabeth. The two spent hours in the garden, Elizabeth sharing stories of her youth and the gardening secrets she had learned over the years. "You know, Emily," Elizabeth said on a particularly pleasant afternoon, "each flower in this garden has a story, just like our family." Emily smiled, caressing her prominent belly, "and we're about to add a new chapter to that story." Alexander, in turn, dove headfirst into the company's new projects. The pro bono department had become a model of corporate social responsibility, attracting media attention and other large corporations. On a Saturday morning, as the family was having breakfast on the terrace, Alexander shared exciting news. "You won't believe it. We've been invited to present our socially responsible business model at an international conference in Chicago." Elizabeth, who once would have been apprehensive about such a change, now smiled with pride. "My son, you're taking the Rothschild name to new heights. Your grandfather would be proud." The mention of the family patriarch brought a moment of reflection. Emily, sensing the opportunity, suggested something bold. "What if we use this platform to tell the true story of the Rothschilds? Not just the successes, but also the struggles and lessons learned. The silence that followed was broken by William, who had joined them for breakfast. "A brilliant idea, my dear. Honesty might be the greatest legacy you can leave." Elizabeth, after a moment of hesitation, nodded. Perhaps it's time to really leave the past behind and embrace who we are now. The days leading up to the conference were a whirlwind of preparations. Emily, despite the limitations of her advanced pregnancy, insisted on helping Alexander prepare his presentation. Together, they wove a narrative that not only highlighted the company's successes, but also addressed the personal and family challenges that had led them to this point. On the eve of the trip, a small crisis ensued. Emily felt contractions, and for a moment, everyone feared the baby would arrive earlier than expected. After a few tense hours at the hospital, the doctor assured them it was just a false alarm. "But no long trips, Mrs. Rothschild," the doctor warned. "The baby is eager to meet the world." The decision was difficult but unanimous. Alexander would go alone to the conference, representing not just the company, but the entire family. On the morning of departure at JFK Airport, the scene was touching. Elizabeth adjusted her son's tie with maternal care that surprised everyone. Emily, with tears in her eyes, hugged her husband. "Go and tell our story," she said. "Show the world that the Rothschilds are more than a name or a fortune." William, who had insisted on accompanying Alexander as moral support, smiled at the group. "Don't worry. I'll take care of our boy." As the plane took off, Emily and Elizabeth watched from the lounge window side by side. At that moment, they weren't daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, but two women united by love for the same family. Back at the mansion, a surprise awaited Emily. The staff, led by the housekeeper, had prepared a small party to celebrate the family's new phase. "You've brought light to this house, ma'am," said the housekeeper emotionally. "We all feel the difference." That night, as she prepared for bed, Emily reflected on the incredible journey she had lived in the past few months. From an anonymous teacher to an integral part of one of New York's most influential families, her life had transformed in ways she had never imagined. Lying in bed with her hands on her belly, she whispered to her baby, "My love, you're going to be born into a family that has learned the true meaning of unity. I can't wait to introduce you to everyone." Across the country, Alexander was preparing for his presentation, Emily's words echoing in his ears. He knew that what he would say the next day wouldn't just be about business, but about redemption, love, and the transformative power of honesty. As the night progressed, both in New York and Chicago, a feeling of expectation hung in the air. The Rothschild family was about to turn a new page in their history, a page written with the ink of truth and sealed with the love of a family that had finally found itself. The sun had barely risen in New York when the phone rang at the Rothschild mansion. Emily, who had slept restlessly, answered quickly, her heart racing. "Emily?" Alexander's voice sounded emotional on the other end of the line. "I just got off stage. It was incredible." As Alexander narrated the events of the conference in Chicago, Emily felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia for not being there. He told how, upon revealing the true story of the Rothschilds, including Elizabeth's origins and the recent family conflicts, the auditorium fell into absolute silence. "And then," Alexander continued, "when I talked about how you transformed our family, how you taught us the value of authenticity." Emily, people stood up and applauded. Many were crying. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she listened. At that moment, Elizabeth entered the room, concerned about the crying. Seeing Emily's expression, she approached and held her hand in silent support. "Alexander," Emily said, putting the phone on speaker, "your mother is here. Tell her too." The next few minutes were intensely emotional as Alexander recounted how the Rothschild story had touched not just business people, but journalists and social activists present. The honesty and vulnerability demonstrated had transformed the family's image from mere magnates to symbols of change and redemption. "Mom," Alexander said, his voice choked, "I received invitations for lectures at universities, TV shows. Everyone wants to know more about our journey." Elizabeth, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "My son, you did what I never had the courage to do. You exposed our wounds so they could heal in the light of day. I'm proud of you." The moment was interrupted by a sudden groan from Emily. She turned pale, clutching her belly. "Emily, what is it?" Alexander's voice sounded alarmed over the phone. I think it's time, Emily gasped. The baby is coming. The next moments were a whirlwind. Elizabeth, maintaining surprising calm, called the ambulance while trying to soothe Emily. Over the phone, Alexander was panicking, torn between wanting to return immediately and the impossibility of doing so in time. Alexander, darling, Elizabeth said, taking control. I'll take care of Emily. You catch the next flight. We'll do our best to wait for you. At the hospital, the hours dragged on. Emily, between contractions, held Elizabeth's hand tightly. The mother-in-law, who months before was seen as an adversary, was now her safe harbor. Elizabeth, Emily gasped during a moment of calm. Thank you for being here. Elizabeth smiled, tears in her eyes. My dear, you taught me that family goes beyond blood. I'm exactly where I should be. Meanwhile, at Chicago O'Hare Airport, Alexander and William were rushing to catch the first available flight. The hours on the plane seemed endless, each minute a torture for the anxious father. Back at the hospital, the labor intensified. Emily, exhausted, found strength in Elizabeth's words of encouragement and the memory of everything they had overcome as a family. It was at the most critical moment, when Emily felt she couldn't go on, that the door to the room burst open. Alexander, breathless and with his clothes wrinkled from the trip, rushed in. I made it, he said, tears in his eyes, taking his place beside Emily. With the family finally reunited, Emily found the strength for the final pushes. And then, with a powerful cry that echoed through the room, the newest member of the Rothschild family arrived in the world. It's a girl, announced the doctor, placing the baby in Emily's arms. Alexander, emotional, kissed his wife's forehead and gently caressed his daughter's head. Elizabeth, observing the scene, felt her heart overflow with love. What will her name be? Elizabeth asked softly. Emily and Alexander exchanged a look of understanding before answering in unison. Hope. At that moment, with Hope in Emily's arms, Alexander by her side, and Elizabeth watching with love, the Rothschild family felt that a cycle was complete. The wounds of the past had been exposed, understood, and finally were beginning to heal. Outside the room, William observed the scene through the window, a satisfied smile on his face. His mission, begun with that anonymous letter months ago, was finally complete. The family he loved so much had found its way back to unity and true love. As the sun set over New York City, casting a golden glow through the hospital window, little Hope opened her eyes for the first time as if to witness the new chapter that was beginning, not just for her, but for the entire Rothschild dynasty. Autumn arrived in New York, bringing with it a cool breeze and the scent of change. The Rothschild mansion, once a symbol of inflexible tradition, now pulsed with new energy. Hope's soft cries echoed through the corridors, mixing with the laughter and animated conversations of the family. 3 months had passed since the birth of the little heiress, and the lives of the Rothschilds had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Emily, adapting to motherhood with a mixture of enthusiasm and exhaustion, found in Elizabeth a surprising ally. On a sunny afternoon, the two women were sitting in the garden, Hope sleeping peacefully in Elizabeth's arms. You know, Emily, Elizabeth began, her voice soft so as not to wake her granddaughter, when you entered our lives, I feared that everything we had built would crumble. Now I see that you were the missing foundation to strengthen our family. Emily smiled, moved. And you, Elizabeth, taught me that tradition and change can walk side by side. Meanwhile, in the company office, Alexander faced new challenges. The Rothschild story had spread, and now companies from all over the country sought his guidance to implement more ethical and socially responsible practices. Alexander, said one of the partners during a meeting, we need to expand. There's a huge demand for our expertise in corporate social responsibility. Alexander nodded, thoughtful. Maybe it's time to transform our experience into something bigger. A consultancy, perhaps, or a foundation? The idea quickly gained momentum. In a few weeks, plans for the Rothschild Foundation for Social Responsibility began to take shape. The goal was not only to advise companies, but also to invest in educational projects in underprivileged communities, a tribute to Emily's roots as a teacher. One night, as the family gathered for dinner, Alexander shared the news. It's amazing, said Emily, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. We could create scholarship programs, community education centers. Elizabeth, who once would have hesitated in the face of such changes, now smiled with approval. Imagine the impact we could have, using our influence to really make a difference. It was at this moment that William, who had become a constant presence in the house, made a surprising suggestion. "What if we started right here?" he proposed. "The Rothschild mansion is huge. We could transform part of it into an educational center." The silence that followed was broken by Hope's cheerful laugh, as if the little one was giving her approval to the plan. In the months that followed, the Rothschild mansion became a construction site. An entire wing was renovated and transformed into modern classrooms, a library and living spaces. Emily, inspired, decided to return to teaching, this time coordinating the foundation's educational programs. The inauguration of the Hope Rothschild Educational Center was an event that attracted national attention. Journalists, businesspeople, and politicians crowded the mansion's gardens, eager to witness the transformation of one of New York's most traditional families. Elizabeth, elegant as always, cut the inauguration ribbon, with Emily, Alexander, and little Hope by her side. Her speech moved everyone. For generations, the Rothschilds were synonymous with power and tradition. Today we inaugurate a new era, an era in which our strength will be measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we share. This is our true legacy. As the first groups of students began to attend the center, the mansion gained a new life. The once silent corridors now echoed with young and enthusiastic voices. Elizabeth, to everyone's surprise, offered to teach gardening classes, sharing her passion with a new generation. Alexander, dividing his time between the company and the foundation, found a new purpose. His lectures on business ethics and social responsibility filled auditoriums, inspiring a new generation of leaders. One evening, as the family gathered on the terrace, watching the sunset over the now bustling gardens, Emily reflected on the incredible journey they had taken. "Who would have thought," she said, holding Hope in her arms, "that a chance encounter in front of the Met would change so many lives?" Alexander embraced his wife, looking lovingly at his daughter. "It wasn't chance, my love. It was destiny showing us a new path." Elizabeth, seated next to William, nodded with a smile. "And what a wonderful path we chose to follow." As the stars began to dot the New York City sky, the Rothschild family, now larger and stronger than ever, looked to the future with hope and determination. They had learned that true legacy lies not in names or fortunes, but in the positive impact we can have on the world around us. And so, with hope growing in a home full of love and purpose, the Rothschilds embarked on a new chapter of their story. A story no longer defined by secrets and rigid traditions, but by compassion, courage, and the transformative power of true love. As the years passed, the Rothschild Foundation for Social Responsibility grew beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a local initiative in New York soon spread across the country and then internationally. The Hope Rothschild Educational Center became a model for similar institutions worldwide, with Emily at the helm of its ever-expanding educational programs. Alexander, now a respected figure in the world of ethical business, found himself regularly speaking at global forums on corporate responsibility. The Rothschild name, once associated primarily with wealth and power, had become synonymous with positive social change. Elizabeth, in her golden years, discovered a new passion in mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Her garden, once a private refuge, now served as an outdoor classroom where she taught not just horticulture, but life lessons to eager students. Hope, growing into a curious and compassionate young girl, was raised with a foot in two worlds, the privilege of her family name and the responsibility that came with it. She spent as much time in the mansion's opulent rooms as she did in the classrooms of the educational center, learning from an early age the value of education and social equality. On Hope's 10th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration that was both grand and intimate. As cake was served on the terrace overlooking the garden, William raised a toast. "To Hope," he said, his eyes twinkling, "who lives up to her name in more ways than one, and to the Rothschilds who proved that even the oldest trees can grow new branches." Emily and Alexander exchanged glances, their hands intertwined. They thought back to that fateful day in front of the Met, marveling at how far they had come. Elizabeth, watching her granddaughter blow out the candles, felt a profound sense of peace. The family she had once sought to protect through control and tradition was now stronger and more vibrant than ever, held together by bonds of love and shared purpose. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Hope approached her grandmother with a question. "Grandma," she said, her young face serious, "do you think we're making a difference, really?" Elizabeth knelt down, meeting her granddaughter's eyes. "My dear," she said softly, "every life we touch, every mind we open, every heart we inspire, that's the difference we make. And it ripples out in ways we may never fully see." Hope nodded, seeming to grasp the weight of her grandmother's words. She then ran off to join her parents, who were discussing plans for the foundation's next big project. As night fell over New York City, the lights of the Rothschild mansion glowed warmly, a beacon of hope in more ways than one. Inside, a family once divided by secrets and expectations now stood united in their mission to make the world a little bit better, one day at a time. And so, the story of the Rothschilds continued to unfold, no longer a tale of mere wealth and influence, but one of redemption, reinvention, and the enduring power of love to transform not just individuals, but entire legacies. As Hope grew into her teenage years, the Rothschild Foundation's influence continued to expand. On her 16th birthday, instead of a lavish party, Hope requested a special project, the launch of a global youth leadership program aimed at fostering social responsibility in the next generation. Emily and Alexander, bursting with pride, worked tirelessly alongside their daughter to bring her vision to life. The program, aptly named New Horizons, quickly gained international recognition, attracting young minds from all corners of the world. Elizabeth, now in her twilight years but still sharp as ever, took on the role of honorary advisor to the program. Her journey from a rigid upholder of tradition to a champion of progressive change made her an invaluable mentor to the young participants. One crisp autumn morning, as the family gathered for breakfast, Hope made an announcement that would set the stage for the next chapter of the Rothschild legacy. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady with conviction, "about college and my future role in the foundation." The room fell silent, all eyes on the young woman who carried not just the Rothschild name, but the hopes and dreams of a transformed family. "I want to study social entrepreneurship," Hope continued, "and then I want to take what I learn and apply it to expanding our work in developing countries." Alexander and Emily exchanged proud glances, while Elizabeth reached out to squeeze her granddaughter's hand. "My dear," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with emotion, "you truly are the best of all of us." As Hope outlined her plans, William, who had become like a grandfather to her, listened with a knowing smile. He remembered the day he sent that anonymous letter, setting in motion a chain of events that led to this moment. "You know," he interjected, "there's a saying that the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. I think, my dear family, we've done just that." The family nodded in agreement, each lost in thought about the journey that had brought them here. As the sun rose higher in the New York sky, casting a golden glow over the city, the Rothschilds looked to the future with hope and determination. They had learned that true wealth lay not in bank accounts or social status, but in the positive impact one could have on the world. And so, with hope leading the way, the Rothschild legacy continued to evolve. No longer just a name in the annals of financial history, but a beacon of social change, a testament to the power of love, honesty, and the unwavering belief that it's never too late to rewrite one's story. As the years rolled on, the Rothschild name became synonymous not with old money but with new ideas. Hope, now a young woman in her 20s, had taken the reins of the foundation, steering it towards even more ambitious goals. Under her leadership, the Rothschild Foundation launched initiatives that tackled global issues head-on, from sustainable energy projects in developing nations to innovative education programs in underserved communities. Hope's vision knew no bounds. Emily and Alexander, while still actively involved, had taken a step back, allowing their daughter to carve her own path. They watched with pride as Hope navigated board meetings and international conferences with the same grace and determination that had defined their own journey. Elizabeth, now in her 90s, had become something of a family sage. Her birthday celebrations had turned into annual gatherings where multiple generations of Rothschilds, along with countless individuals whose lives had been touched by the foundation, came together to honor her legacy. It was during one such celebration that Hope made an announcement that would once again reshape the family's future. "We've achieved so much," she began, addressing the gathered crowd, "but there's still so much more to do. That's why I've decided to run for public office." The room buzzed with excitement and surprise. Alexander and Emily, though initially taken aback, quickly rallied behind their daughter's decision. Elizabeth, her eyes shining with unshed tears, simply nodded her approval. As Hope outlined her platform, one built on social equality, environmental sustainability, and ethical governance, William couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From a family nearly torn apart by secrets and expectations to one united in their mission to change the world. In the months that followed, the Rothschild mansion once again became a hub of activity, this time serving as the headquarters for Hope's campaign. The gardens where Elizabeth had once taught Hope about nurturing growth now hosted community meetings and policy discussions. As election day approached, the family gathered for a quiet dinner, a rare moment of peace in the whirlwind of campaigning. As they sat around the table, Emily raised her glass for a toast. "To Hope," she said, her voice full of emotion, "who reminds us every day that our name is not our destiny, our actions are." Alexander added, "And to our family, who proved that it's never too late to change course and make a difference." Elizabeth, her hand slightly shaking as she held her glass, spoke last. "To love," she said simply, "which brought us together and showed us the way." As they clinked glasses, the sound resonating through the room, each member of the Rothschild family reflected on their incredible journey. From Emily and Alexander's chance meeting to the transformation of their family legacy, from Hope's birth to her current path in shaping the future, every step had been guided by love, honesty, and a commitment to making the world a better place. Outside, the New York City skyline glittered in the evening light, a testament to the power of change and the enduring strength of a family united by more than just a name. The Rothschild story, once a tale of wealth and privilege, had become an inspiring saga of redemption, purpose, and the transformative power of love. As night fell and stars began to twinkle above the city that had witnessed their transformation, the Rothschilds looked to the future with hope, ready for whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead. Their legacy, no longer confined to the pages of financial history, now belonged to the countless lives they had touched and the changes they had set in motion. And so the story of the Rothschilds continued, not an ending but a new beginning, a reminder that with love, courage, and determination, any family can rewrite its story and leave a legacy that truly matters.